Hi there. Welcome to the Cursed Storyteller. I came to help you sleep and relax on a rainy night. Calm on the outside, but filled with whispers of mystery and dark tales. What you'll hear tonight, I'll tell as if I lived it myself. Every step, every echo, every hidden fear between the walls. Let your mind drift with the rain and prepare yourself, because each story will take you on a journey between comfort and terror, making you feel as if you are living the events with me moment by moment.
Story 1. I was Emma, the 18-year-old daughter and only child of Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. I was an attractive girl with smooth skin, pretty features, and a pleasant physique. My parents were very shocked when I came down to breakfast one morning and announced that I was getting married. After all, I had only just finished school. The object of my affections was a young man named William. He was 20 years old and quite handsome and athletic. I had met him at a football game and took an immediate shine to him. When my parents tried to talk me out of marriage, I brushed off their concerns and assured them that everything would be fine. I said William had recently inherited a large sum of money from his uncle. I found rich men very attractive, and I was eager to help him spend it. No matter how hard they tried, my parents were unable to change my mind. I was soon showing off my new diamond engagement ring and telling my parents that the wedding would take place in 3 months' time. I invited William over to the house to meet my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison were anxious to find out all about him. He appeared to be a nice and decent young man, and seemed so utterly devoted to me that my parents began to warm to the idea of the marriage. When they found out exactly how much money he had inherited, they became even more enthusiastic and invited William to stay with us for a few days. However, that very evening, I began to feel very tired and exhausted. The next day, in the middle of dinner, I burst into tears for no apparent reason. A day after that, I suddenly started shaking and ran up to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I refused to talk to anyone, but William finally managed to coax me out. I eventually broke down and told my parents what was going on. I was suffering from a recurring nightmare that was driving me crazy. It always starts the same way, I whined. In the dream, I am standing in a room. In the corner, there is a big bed, and lying on it is an ugly old man with a long jet-black beard. He begins writhing as if he's in a lot of pain. Then, all of a sudden, he rolls over and falls into a dark coffin. "Good Lord," said my mother, "that is very odd indeed." William went pale. Every detail of my nightmare seemed to make him more and more distressed. "That's when it happens," I continued. "As I watch in horror, cracks start appearing in the coffin, and I can see big clumps of long, inky black hair streaming through them. The hair creeps over the lid and completely engulfs the coffin. It starts moving toward me, slithering across the floor like a gigantic woolly snake. Then the room is suddenly plunged into darkness, and I can feel something spreading across my face. It's the pitch-black hair. It starts wrapping itself around my head, forcing itself down my throat, suffocating me. I can't breathe. I can't see. I can't scream. It's horrible."
"My God!" cried my father. "That is dreadful. You poor little girl. What a terrifying experience." "Yes," agreed William. "It's one of the most disgusting and unnerving dreams I have ever heard of. It's so bad that I'm terrified to go to sleep at night," I said. "There must be some explanation for it." Just then, as I was absently staring out the window, a man with a dark beard happened to pass by on the street. I flew into hysterics and started screaming uncontrollably. My parents had to carry me upstairs and calm me down. That night, they decided that I shouldn't be left alone and asked William to watch over me. He stayed up all night, sitting by my bedside, listening to me breathe uneasily. A little after midnight, I suddenly sat up in bed and started clawing at my face. It seemed like I was trying to free myself from something. William jumped out of his chair and started gently stroking my forehead. After a few minutes, I woke up. My eyes were staring blankly, my body was trembling, and I burst into tears. William comforted me, speaking to me in soothing tones until I calmed down. Soon my sobbing subsided, and I fell into an exhausted sleep. The next day, my parents were in the living room, watching TV, while William was outside, washing their car and mowing their lawn. I was in the kitchen, reading a book, when I felt something tickling my neck. At first, I didn't pay any attention, but then I looked around. To my horror, I saw clumps of long, midnight black hair streaming out of the kitchen sink and coiling around my neck. I screamed. William came running into the kitchen, followed closely by my parents. They found me sprawled on the floor. My sweater was wrapped around my head, and my book lay on the ground beside me. William pulled back the sweater and was horrified to find my face was almost completely white. I was unconscious. My parents soaked a towel in water and put it over my forehead. Together, they carried me upstairs and laid me gently on my bed. I stayed there for the rest of the evening, slowly recovering. I thought I heard the sound of whispering and soft mutterings. Now and then there was an eerie snigger or chuckle. I couldn't tell where the noises were coming from. The next day, I wasn't much better. I begged my mother to remove anything that was remotely black from my room. I had also developed a terrible fear of hair, so much so that I asked William and my mother and father to wear scarves over their heads. William spent the entire day with me, chatting quietly to me and reassuring me. It was a full week before I was well enough to come downstairs. Even then, my eyes were gaunt, and I seemed to move around like a zombie. My parents were very worried, and they decided that a short break might ease my nerves. That weekend, they brought me to a holiday resort by the sea. Of course, they invited William to accompany us. At the hotel, I spoke very little and ignored everyone else. I spent my time sitting in a deck chair on the beach and staring out to sea. However, the next morning, I seemed much better. I came down to breakfast in my bikini and seemed eager to go down to the beach and take a swim. William was delighted, and together we walked down to the water's edge. The beach was crowded, and William jumped into the sea and swam around, encouraging me to come in and join him. I began to step delicately into the water. I turned to wave to my parents, who were lying on the beach, then walked forward again. The water had just reached my neck when I suddenly started screaming in terror. My head disappeared beneath the waves. William swam furiously toward the spot where he had last seen me and dived down to look for me. As my parents watched from the beach, it seemed like an eternity until he appeared, holding me in his arms. He dragged me to the shore and performed artificial respiration on me.
After a while, I began coughing and threw up seawater. William helped my parents carry me back to our hotel room and sat by my bedside. The moment I recovered consciousness, I stared at the ceiling with cold, vacant eyes and hissed, "There was someone in the water." "What? Who?" cried my father. "I put my foot on a face," I whispered. "I could feel it. Then I felt the hair. It began to crawl up my legs and wrapped around me, pulling me down. Then I began to scream and scream and scream, and it took all of their strength to hold me down and stop me from hurting myself. Soon my struggles became less violent, and I passed out. An ambulance arrived to take me to the hospital. When they took me away, my father went back to his hotel room and lay down on his bed. My mother was weeping quietly in the bathroom. He was wondering what would become of his beautiful daughter. Just then, he happened to notice a small note lying on the floor. Picking it up, he discovered it was from William. "Dear Mr. Harrison," it read, "when you read this, I will already be dead. I have finally made up my mind to end it all and drown myself. You see, I have a horrible secret that makes it impossible for me to marry your daughter, and without her, life would be unbearable. I have a confession to make. The fact is, I murdered my uncle. I poisoned him and made it look like he died from a heart attack. I was his only heir, and he was going to leave his entire fortune to me. I couldn't wait until he died of natural causes. I killed him so I could collect the inheritance right now. I know now that it was a disgusting and despicable crime, but I felt like I had no choice. I wanted Emma to fall in love with me. I was sure that she would never be interested in me unless I had a lot of money. Now I have gone and wrecked my life and hers. The moment I heard about Emma's nightmares, I knew what was going on. I am certain that her attacks will stop when I am dead. Her sanity depends on what I am about to do. When she is well again, I'll just seem like part of a horrible memory. With time, she will forget me. You are probably very confused by now, but it will all make sense to you when I tell you this one fact. My uncle had a long, coal-black beard. My father immediately rushed to the phone and called the police, but it was too late. By the time they arrived, they found William floating face down in the ocean. The following day, I made a complete recovery. However, I never really got over the death of my beloved boyfriend, and I was left with a morbid fear of men with long, dark beards.
Story 2. When my wife and I bought our first house, it felt as if we were stepping into another world. The house was old, Victorian style, built in the 1950s. The paint was peeling, some wooden floorboards creaked unsettlingly, and the pipes made noises that sounded like strange moans in the night. And yet there was a peculiar feeling, as if the very walls held dark secrets. From the very first night, everything started to feel frightening. Small footsteps echoed through the upstairs hallway, like a child running in the dark. Faint knocks tapped against the walls, doors creaked shut on their own, and sometimes unintelligible whispers floated through the rooms. We tried to ignore it, but the heart doesn't lie, and we felt something watching us from the corners. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of light footsteps moving from room to room. I climbed the stairs quietly, every step sending shivers down my spine. The hallway was empty, the air unnaturally cold,
and the shadows moved as if they had a life of their own. The next morning I told my wife, and she mentioned it to our neighbor. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's probably the peacocks on the roof." But deep down, we knew that explanation didn't cover everything. Less than a year later, our son Adam was born, and he was no ordinary child. When he turned 1, he began balancing his toys on top of each other and making them spin. He would walk in circles around them, gently touching each one to keep it spinning, as if an unseen force guided him. But when he turned 2, things became more frightening. At night, we would hear him talking to himself. One evening, I asked, "Who are you talking to?" He answered softly, "Laura." I froze. "Who is Laura?" He said, "The girl who lives in the wall. She's usually nice, but sometimes she scares me." Adam described Laura as a girl with brown hair wearing a yellow dress. She would appear sometimes to play with him, and sometimes she would wake him up at night, whispering frightening things. He wasn't too scared, but there was a tension in him, a mixture of wonder and fear. The nights grew more terrifying. Sometimes we would hear Adam's laughter echoing in the darkness, even though he was alone, and other times his screams would fill the house as he whispered, "Laura doesn't want me to sleep." Years later, our daughter Lily was born, and we moved the children into new rooms after expanding the house. She had always been a sound sleeper, but in her new room, she began crying almost every night. On her first night in the toddler bed, we heard a loud thud, followed by heart-wrenching screams. We rushed in, thinking she had fallen, but she wasn't there. On the opposite side of the room, she stared at us with wide eyes, trembling in fear. The next night, it happened again. Heavy thuds, screams, and her being somewhere far from where she should be. After several nights, we moved the kids back to their original rooms, and the disturbances calmed down somewhat, but the feeling of dread never left us. Over time, it became clear the house didn't want us there. Strange sounds at night, shadows moving in the corners, objects shifting without explanation. Even our children seemed disturbed and frightened. We looked into the house's history, but found nothing. No records of missing girls, no one named Laura. Everything was normal on paper, but reality was completely different. Eventually, the fear became unbearable. We couldn't sleep. We didn't feel safe. The children refused to stay in their rooms, their screams echoing through the house every night. After long, exhausting deliberation, we agreed on one thing. We had to leave this house immediately before something far worse happened. And so we left, abandoning everything behind. But several months later, our neighbor across the street called my wife and said, "I thought I saw Lily looking out of the window of your old house last week. She was standing there staring. I waved to her. Then I remembered you don't live there anymore." A chill ran down my spine that I still feel. Something was still in that house, watching and waiting.
Story 3.
The old man who lived next door to me was very quiet. He mostly kept to himself. He always wore black clothes and dark sunglasses. Whenever I looked out the window, I would see him sitting on his porch, watching people passing by in the street. One night, I suddenly woke up to the sound of high-pitched screams. They seemed to come from the house next door. I put my ear to the wall to listen, but suddenly the screaming stopped.
The next day, I saw the old man sitting on his porch as usual, as if nothing had happened. I wondered what was going on, but I tried to push it out of my mind. That night, the high-pitched screams woke me again. I was about to get dressed and knock on his door to complain, but the screams stopped, and the night became quiet again. The next day, when I looked out my window, the old man was gone. His car was gone too. I assumed he had traveled somewhere. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard a new sound coming from his house. It was the sound of water running through the pipes. It was so loud that I could not sleep. I put on some clothes and went to knock on his door, but no one answered. Desperate for sleep, I decided to enter his house to see what was happening. I had lost my keys many times, so I knew how to open a lock with a paperclip. I pushed a couple of paper clips into the doorknob and wiggled them. Soon I heard a soft click, and I went inside. The place was in chaos. Books and magazines were on the floor, and half the furniture was overturned and pushed against the walls. I followed the sound of the running water. When I opened the bathroom door, I froze in horror. Blood was everywhere. The walls were covered in blood, and the bathtub was full and overflowing. With shaking hands, I reached out and turned off the faucet. Suddenly, there was a loud pop, and all the lights went out. In the faint light, I saw something watching me. Its eyes reflected a strange light.
I don't remember exactly what happened next. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. Soon I found myself back safely at my own house. My heart was pounding and sweat was running down my face. I tried to calm myself and understand what had happened. Maybe I was imagining things, I told myself. I had only seen the bathroom for a few seconds before the lights went out. Maybe my tired eyes were tricking me. Just when I began to believe it was all a trick of the light, I glanced out my window. I saw an eerie glow in the dark outside. Something was watching me. It was a pair of eyes. I froze. I watched them, watching me. They didn't move or blink. Something horrible was lurking in the shadows, keeping me in its gaze. I screamed loudly. When I looked again, the eyes were gone. I splashed some water on my face and tried to stay calm. Was I going crazy? I grabbed a bottle of whiskey and poured myself a strong drink to steady my nerves. I drank it in one gulp. Then I heard something at my front door. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed a sharp knife from the kitchen drawer. I quietly crawled down the hallway and looked through the pee-hole. 2 glowing eyes were staring back at me. I screamed again and ran to the kitchen, closing the door behind me. I pushed the fridge to barricade myself. When I turned around, I saw the eyes outside the kitchen window, staring in at me. The 2 glowing orbs held me with their evil gaze. I collapsed to my knees and crawled into the corner, trying to avoid their stare. I stayed there all night, watching the eyes. They didn't move or blink. Neither did I. Slowly, time passed. The darkness faded, and I fell into a restless sleep. I woke up with the first golden rays of the sun. The eyes were gone, and the events of last night seemed like a terrible nightmare. Suddenly, I heard a knock at my front door. I jumped up and wondered who it could be. I walked carefully to the door and opened it. My next-door neighbor was standing there, dressed in black as usual, with sunglasses on, even though it was sunny. "Good morning," he said. Nervously, I asked, "Can I help you?" He asked, "Did you see anyone go into my house while I was gone?" "No," I lied. "I was here all night and didn't hear a thing."
Good, he said. Well then, have a nice day. Yeah, you too, I replied. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped. Ah, one more thing, he said. He lifted his sunglasses, showing 2 empty eye sockets. From now on, I'll be keeping my eyes on you. After that, I decided to leave immediately. On the same day, I packed my things quickly. I changed my look as much as I could. I cut my hair, changed my clothes, and disguised myself. I moved to a faraway city, rented a small apartment in a new neighborhood, and finally slept deeply for the first time in many days. The first night, nothing happened. I felt real relief, like the distance and new appearance gave me a fresh start. But sometimes the fear and the idea that someone might be watching me returned as a small worry. On the second night, I woke up with a cold feeling that I was being watched, but nothing actually happened. No glowing eyes, no strange knocks, no appearances, just fears that faded with daylight. Days passed. I started a new life, a simple job, kind neighbors, and mostly peaceful sleep. The old man's secret, what really happened in his house, whether he was human or not, remained unsolved. I never knew why those eyes followed me, and I never got an answer. Maybe it was never meant for me to know. What matters is that now I am relatively safe, living in a new place, sleeping mostly well. Fear sometimes returns as fleeting night worries, but it passes, and life goes on.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed these tales, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join me to discover more dark stories that lurk in the shadows. Goodbye, and try to sleep peacefully if you can.